Keir Starmer's plans for net zero are wild and dangerous. They view this as something that has to be done at all costs. Electricity prices are where the pain is going to be felt. Labour, with their huge majority behind them, are in a position really to do these things without a lot of resistance. It means that taxes are going to go up. This could snowball.
Could we see lights going off and so on if, the wind doesn't blow or if the sun doesn't shine?
They know that the costs are going to go through the roof, but they've done it anyway. Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband are fanatics. The whole thing is really getting quite scary now. The costs of doing net zero far outweigh the benefits. But we've now reached the point at which it's going to start to accelerate. That is going to drive prices up essentially exponentially from now on. They never ask the question, at what point do the costs outweigh the benefits?
What do you think of Keir Starmer's plans for net zero?
Keir Starmer's plans for net zero are wild and dangerous, I think it's fair to say. We've reached pretty much a critical point in the net zero drive, and in particular the drive to move us away from fossil fuels onto electricity to decarbonise the grid through renewables. The prices having been increasing in a pretty much a linear fashion for the last 20 years. The more renewables we put on the grid, the more prices go up. But we've now reached the point at which it's going to start to accelerate. And that is driven by more capacity. As more capacity comes onto the grid, we're starting to see periods where we're producing more electricity than we actually need. Now, what that means is that you have to switch off the wind turbines. So essentially, each new wind turbine you bring on, each new wind farm gives you less electricity, but at the same cost. So that is going to drive prices up essentially exponentially from now on. So it is really going to get quite dangerous. Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband are essentially, Ed Miliband in particular, are fanatics on this. They're not treating this as a rational prospect, and that we have to weigh up costs and benefits. They view this as something that has to be done at all costs, and that is a very dangerous place for us to be in.
What kind of price increases or real world consequences do British people face under Keir Starmer? Which energy bills could go up? What are the real world? Because net zero seems a bit abstract to some people. It's quite a big macro policy that we're talking about. So what kind of individual price increases or consequences are there for British consumers?
Okay, so electricity prices are where the pain is going to be felt. I mean, obviously, while we still have supplies of gas, then, obviously it depends on gas prices set in, international markets. But assuming those stay the same, electricity prices are still going to go up. Electricity prices doubled between 2002 and 2020 on the eve of the Ukraine war. That was a period over which gas prices broadly stayed the same. They were there were ups and there were downs, but the average level stayed about the same. And that was because of more renewables. So we can expect more of that. Electricity bills will go up. But of course, it's every other aspect of life as well, because energy bills feed through into the cost of living as well. And at the same time as that, we can probably expect gas prices to go up too, simply because Mr. Starmer and Mr. Miliband seem to be going out of their way to drive the oil and gas industry away from our shores. It is getting to the stage, I think, where your big oil and gas companies are wondering whether it is really worth the bother anymore. At the moment, they're sort of in the worlds where they're going, we're not going to open up any new oil and gas fields because the tax regime's no good. But we may be getting to the stage where they're just going to say, we're just going to shut up shop, because they're now facing a whole new tranche of environmental regulations. We've just seen that they're looking at the government have said that they're not going to defend decisions to allow new oil and gas fields that have been challenged by Greenpeace. They've said we're not going to defend that in the courts, and therefore those new oil and gas fields won't go ahead. The whole thing is really getting quite scary now. The government have said that essentially they've spurned a whole lot of new income. New oil and gas fields bring new tax revenues, and they've essentially said, well, we don't want those. Well, where are they going to get the money from instead? Well, I think that means you and I and the man in the street. So it means that taxes are going to go up, and as energy prices go up, profits are going to go down, and so corporation tax is going to go down, and so the cost of running the country falls more and more upon our taxes, and that's quite scary. I think this could snowball to the extent that the productive people leave the country, the productive companies leave the country, and we're left with a growing tax burden on everybody else.
So their plans are to rely on so-called renewable energies, solar farms, wind farms, and so on. But is your argument that these things are unreliable? And what could this kind of policy mean for the reliability of electricity in the UK? Could we see lights going off and so on if the wind doesn't blow or if the sun doesn't shine?
The reliability issue is a concern. From my perspective, it's a secondary concern. The primary concern is just that it's going to be much more expensive, and we can't afford to go back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago with energy prices through the roof. But that's where we're going. My estimates of where we're going, by 2030. Is that prices for electricity will have returned to where they were at the peak of the energy crisis. The reliability issue is a concern. Obviously, the wind doesn't blow all the time, and the sun doesn't shine all the time. And if neither of them are happening, then that is a major problem. Now, at the moment, while they're making a lot of noises about completely decarbonising the grid by 2030, in reality, they're going to have to leave the gas-fired power stations in place, because you get these long periods often in winter where there's no wind at all. And obviously the sun doesn't really shine at that time of year anyway. So essentially you have no other form of generation. So that is where our reliability will come from. But it is getting very tight. We're going to lose a lot of nuclear power stations in the next few years. A lot of our gas-fired power stations are really getting quite old. And frankly, nobody wants to build a new one. So the government says, well, look, we'll get imports from other places, interconnectors, but that is very, very dangerous. We saw at the peak of the energy crisis that Norway had, which exports a lot of electricity from its hydro plants to Europe. It had a bit of a drought, and so it didn't have very much hydropower left. And so it really looked quite seriously at the question of just cutting off the interconnectors to other countries. And that, of course, could happen to us too. I mean, obviously, other people have wind farms too. So if the wind's not blowing here, it's probably not blowing in Europe. And, if electricity is in short supply across Europe, prices go through the roof, and governments, the people who do have a bit of spare power, like French nuclear, might go, well, look, it's better that our people have it than the Brits have it, and they'll cut the interconnectors. So relying on other countries is quite risky. There are other risks of the lights going out as well. They are managed by the grid. So, I think it's more likely that electricity will just become far too expensive than that the lights will actually go out. But it is a risk.
And what gains do we achieve? What would the UK benefit from if we did achieve net zero by 2050?
We would make net losses, if you like. The costs of doing net zero far outweigh the benefits of doing so. So the benefits, if you like, are global warming avoided. And the economists have put a cost of the damage done by a carbon dioxide, and you can compare that to the cost of eliminating a ton of carbon dioxide through doing net zero. And it's interesting, there are no official estimates of those figures worth the mentioning. My own calculations suggest that it's not even close. The costs of doing net zero are so high that it is much better actually to do doing nothing and just dealing with global warming as it happens is actually a much better path for us to take. Although we hear this constant refrain of the global warming running out of control will be the end of the world and we're all going to die and this sort of thing. It isn't actually true. The official numbers from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suggest that unabated global warming will cause us to lose a few percent of GDP. If you actually think about it, there's not a lot that global warming can do to us that we can't manage very easily. The big risks are supposed to be sea level rise. Well, we're used to dealing with sea level rise. The first seawalls we think were built about 3000 BC. So we're getting quite good at it now, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. The official estimates of the cost of building seawalls around the UK to the end of the century it's something like £1 billion a year from memory. It's not very much. We're talking about spending trillions here. So, yeah,
on net zero, you mean?
Yeah, it's the costs far outweigh the benefits. So, it's not something that we should be doing. And I think this is a conversation that has to be had. We haven't, as a society, had this conversation for the last 20 years because dissenting voices have been silenced.
Let's talk a bit more about Ed Miliband and his history of what you call radicalism or, him being a fanatic. Why is Ed Miliband so dangerous, do you think, for net zero and for energy policies?
Ed Miliband, I guess I've covered this before in some ways. I mean, he is a fanatic and he wants to do net zero regardless of the cost. He is completely irrational about this in the way that millions of other people are. They have been frightened by the scientists and by the activists for 20 years, and it has become quasi-religious. And I think Ed Miliband is in the grip of this secular religion, if you like, and so he does things because that's what his religion believes. They believe that decarbonisation is the way to the promised land, and so he will do these things. And if somebody raises concerns about the costs, he will just internally be going, well, that's what we have to do. The cost benefit analysis, I mean, I think this is why there's been no cost benefit analysis, because they don't, they just don't really care what the costs are, because they don't actually want to know whether the costs outweigh the benefits. This is why Ed Miliband is dangerous. And Labour, with their huge majority behind them, are in a position really to do these things without a lot of resistance. I think they probably need quite a lot of by-election results to go against them before they might sort of question where they're going.
Do you think fundamentally the problem is that they view the future without net zero or without decarbonisation as being completely hellish? They use the kind of language of the Greta Thunbergs of the world, which is essentially the world is going to end. And if we don't stop oil, if we don't cut all carbonisation, we are literally going to be living in hell on earth. Is that kind
Absolutely.
of extreme view, fueling this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely, it is a millenarian cult in the way that, you had these millenarian cults in medieval times that you sort of believed in the end of the world. And yeah, I don't think it's not dishonesty. I think they do genuinely think that there is a risk that the world might come to an end. It's an article of faith for them, and I think this is why we get daft things like this happening. I mean, if I come back to where I was, what I was talking about before, this idea that the energy prices are going to start going up exponentially. I think in government they know this. They've awarded all the wind farms in the next auction round a 60% price increase, which has to be paid for by consumers. So they know that the costs are going to go through the roof, but they've done it anyway, and they've never said they never asked the question, at what point do the costs outweigh the benefits? Well, they already do. So these people are quite dangerous, in the way that these kind of secular cults have always been. I mean, you can look at sort of the Chinese communists or something, who sort of had the great leap forward because the great leader Chairman Mao said that's what we've got to do, and so they collectivized agriculture and they built steel furnaces in village backyards and things, and it was a disaster, and tens of millions of people starved to death, and the economy was trashed because they just go on irrationally. And this is where we're going here, and this is why we have to turn around and start trying to get rational discussion of the issues back on the agenda.
What about how young people view this? Because it seems that people of my generation are convinced of the the Ed Milibands of this world, of the Greta Thunbergs. They seem to be very big climate activists. This is a very popular opinion among young people. This is what we've been taught in school and so on. What do you think the consequence of that will be for the future? As future generations grow older and they have these very firm views on climate and on energy policy, are you concerned about that?
Perhaps less concerned than I might be. I know climate change has obviously been drilled into people, into children right through their school careers. I think that there is a significant proportion of children who sense that it's all a bit too certain, that this is complicated science, and when people are speaking with such certainty about the outcomes, it just doesn't feel right to a lot of people. And I think this is a lot of people sense that they are dealing with a religion or a cult or whatever. So I think a lot of people won't have been taken in. And I think a lot of them who have been taken in will start to become rational themselves sooner rather than later, because of the pain that everybody is feeling and is going to be feeling even more in future. This is the one thing we know about these kind of cults is what actually defeats them in the end is just economic pain. Once that is felt, people suddenly start asking questions and see through the fundamentalist blather, if you like. So I don't have particular concerns about the long-term future, because people can get into this way of thinking, but they can get out again.
And are you hopeful of the Tory policy on net zero? Because the Tories seem to be the ones who instigated much of this. They enshrined it into law. Boris Johnson was, I think, just as fanatical as Ed Miliband or anyone else on this policy. So what do you think about the Tory policies towards net zero at the moment?
I see very little hope that the Conservatives can come up with a sensible policy. They've been completely divided here for many years. There is a significant rump, if you like, within the party that is sceptical of climate change alarmism and net zero. But any Conservative leader, certainly Rishi Sunak, and I think probably Boris Johnson before him, even if they wanted to put forward a sceptical policy, they wouldn't have been able to, because that would have divided their party. And if you look at the messages coming from the Conservative leadership candidates now, they are still hedging their bets in exactly the same way. They're saying, oh, we're going to do net zero, but we're going to do it better than the Labour Party, or we're going to do it more slowly, or whatever. That is not going to solve the problem, because the problem is overwhelmingly bad, and it's, perhaps more importantly to them, it's not going to win back all the voters who they've lost to the Reform Party. I think I wrote an article quite recently for Conservative Home saying just this, that Mr. Farage will be very pleased, because it looks very much like they're still not going to be able to unite around a sceptic climate policy.